And today we'll be learning a lot more about UX than actually UI. So just before, I know that Liz introduced me, but a little bit more about myself is, yes, I do have, as mentioned earlier, I have quite a few years of experience in UI and front end. Currently, majorly, I'm working on Angular and NGRX technologies. I do sometimes side projects on React, but 90% of my work is on Angular. I have been in past a speaker of Women in Tech, a chairperson there, and I'm a strong supporter for Women in Tech. Here are some of the pictures of my personal life. The left is just, most of you have already heard about Grace Hopper. If you have not attended one, I strongly recommend attend the event. It is one of the largest events for women in tech, and the picture is from there, where all the folks from Carnegie Mellon got together and get to know each other. Rest of the pictures are more about what I like to do when I'm not working on front end. And I am married and I have 2 dogs who love to go to the beach. So getting started with what exactly is the difference between UI and UX, and why is it so important for us, even though we are front-end and UI developers, to think like UX, right? All of you guys know that the left side of the brain is actually used for analytical thinking, but the right-hand side of the brain is used for the creative thinking. Not saying that the UX does not deal with the right side of the brain and does not think about the UI, but it's just that what are the differences between it? So just to talk more about, UX usually does a lot of research and analysis of our users and tries to create the designs which are more human-centered or specific to users. Like, are my users, are they tech-oriented? Do they know drag and drop features? Are they visually impaired? Do I need to? So basically, do I need to add something additional to our users with special needs? These are all the thought processes that goes into a UX person, along with trying to think about the flow of the application or the feature, the interactions of the user, etc. Right? Whereas a front-end developer, or if a person is working and focused on the UI, what is it trying to do? It is basically trying to make sure that the alignment, the topography, and the colors, everything that was given by the UX goes and matches with the markups, right? He's continuously focusing on the consistency of the application. And how can we basically ensure that the application is more functionally working rather than just focusing on these minor details of the colors or how user interacts with the system. So the next topic, now that we know a little bit more about how UI and UX thinks a bit differently, let's go into what is basically design thinking. So how does a UX thinks? When it is trying to create a markup, how does it come up with the markup, right? One of the qualities that every UX must have is empathy, right? So why do we need empathy? Empathy does not mean that, okay, it's not just one meaning that how are my users feeling or anything, but it's more related to how are they feeling towards the application? How are they gonna use the application? So defining the requirements, creating ideas, prototyping, and going back and forth with the business people, and basically finalizing the prototype. And thanks to the visual tools that we have available today, we can actually, UX can create the mockups and create a layout for the whole application, and the users can basically interact with the mockups. It's basically using the same application, but everything on the video or everything on the tool is basically static. It's not a live application. This helps the UX people get a very quick feedback, revise any of the mockups or the wireframes that can be done, right? Whereas, what do we do as a front-end developer, right? It's very similar to what UX is doing, right? They are planning, doing the analysis of the users, whereas we are planning and doing the analysis of the requirements and how much time will it take to do. While they design and create the mockups, we use those mockups and basically we design the architecture of our front-end application and start the development process. During the development process, we are continuously testing and modifying things so that we are modifying the code so that it is better fits in with our existing code base, right? And not going deeper into maintenance and delivery phase. Once all of these things are ready, basically we have integrated the UI and we have integrated all the UX wireframes with the UI. So as you can see, even though the names of the processes that whether it's a UI developer or UX is different, but we kind of do very much similar things. And at the end of the day, we are creating an application together for a user and trying to understand his needs. So now that I've talked a little bit about what are the differences between the UI and UX, and then what is basically similarities between the processes of a UI and UX. Some of the tips that I wanted to share, like, okay, we are coding, but what does it mean to think like a UX? First and foremost, an advice to everybody out there, right? Don't start coding without insights. I have personally myself been guilty in my initial years. It is very tempting for a front-end developer to be like, here's the requirement. I need to create a web page, a catalog for products, and let me just quickly start coding. I think the requirement is pretty clear, right? But are we actually trying to understand that why our user needs this feature? I understand that you need to create a website with the catalog of the products, right? But take a pause, think about the holistic approach and try to answer some of these questions, right? Why are we developing these features? What is the business value that we're gonna be adding if we deliver these features? And whom are you developing for, right? Like previously I said, what is your persona? Is this application for visually impaired people? Is it for tech-oriented people? Do they actually know how to drag and drop? Will the application be used on a mobile or on a computer so you can customize some of the things based on the device, right? And even though I know that we all feel that most of our users are tech-oriented, there are still a lot of people who are still getting used to a tech. An example would be my parents, right? They have literally never used the computer, so they are still trying to figure their way out. And just to talk a little bit more about why is this so important, right? UX has already answered these questions, and why do we need to answer this, right? This is basically very important questions. This is very important for us to answer these questions is because it gives us a holistic idea of what our users want. What potentially could be added on top of the features that you're developing today, right? This will in return help us to architect the front end a little bit better. We can decide whether we need to create some of the common components, some of the libraries or functions, or basically how should I write the code if in future, how should we write the code today if the features will be extended and new things will be added on top of it? Will our code be scalable in future? So while some of these questions does not impact our present, it definitely helps us code in a way which is can be extended and is sustainable and scalable in a long run, right? Most of us are already aware of these questions and most of us already know that we need to do this, but I wanted to bring this I wanted to bring this as my first slide because we have to keep reminding ourselves to do this. We have to keep reminding ourselves to understand that what exactly are we doing and why. And for those of you who think sometimes, I don't know if the front end is really it for me, should I be working on the front end? This basically gives you a real value of your work. Like you basically understand that what exactly are you putting forward in front of the clients or your users as compared to going to backend and just creating a couple of services and fetching the data, right? Where user does not know behind the scenes what is happening. So I talked about more like, okay, you need to understand the user needs, you need to figure out what they want. But now that you have understood what do they want, I want you to start thinking like a user when you're trying to develop the code, right? Often you will see that in industries like an example would be from where I am, oil and gas, banking industry, etc., especially even in healthcare, right? You'll always see that there is a gap between what the user needs and what the business needs. And there will be always conflicts between that, right? While you're not the best person to solve those conflicts, you want to step up. And while you're reading the business requirements, you want to think about really about the customer experience when developing any of these features, right? So what does it actually mean? Like, how can I think about a business need? Just for an example, this is something from my current application. The business says that, okay, I need an icon. When I click on it, I should have a couple of options to download multiple ways. I should have an option to download the charting in form of PNG, JPEG, PDF, etc. Right? Now, the real question is that does our users really need all of those three things? Are they going to use it? How are they going to use it, right? So think more like a user. And one thing that we do is once we have thought about the user, maybe we came up with the idea that, hey, okay, the user does not need three options. PNG is not very different from JPEG, so we will just give one option is good enough, right? Now, what happens with the problem? Now we have touching upon that, don't just blindly follow up everything on the mockup, right? We quickly changed the requirement where we had a drop down with three options where we eliminated the two options, right? And this is from a real case, a real life scenario. Now you're coding, you're trying to create this icon so that it can help you download. Every time you're going to the application, try to observe. Now, this is where the customer experience kicks in. You only have two options. You only have one option where you'll be downloading the file. The user has to now click on the icon and then a drop down will show up and we'll have to click on the option again. In this particular scenario, how can you think like a user? Why are we giving them a drop down at the first place if there is only one option? So this is where you need to not just copy everything on the mockup, but revise and discuss it with the UX to ensure that you can disable the dropdown altogether, and just on one click, you can download the image. What has this gained you? As a user, you're not doing 2 clicks to download an image, whereas you have reduced it to 1 click. As a user, I definitely love to not click multiple times on my screen to achieve the same thing. So while there are a lot of ways you can think like a user, one of the most important things in the UX world is that whenever you're trying to code, always make sure that you help the user recognize, diagnose, and recover from the errors, right? While you are too focused on the error handling, ensure that the messages make sense. An example is something like this, right? As a UI developer, you handle the error, and just be mindful. The reason why I'm bringing some of these points is that it's not that UX has not done their job, as have not given you mockups. It is very difficult for a UX to think about all the possible scenarios and failures. So one of the examples over here is like, okay, you have failed to load the page, an error has occurred, and then you're clicking on OK. Like what is the user supposed to do after this has happened? Is he supposed to retry? Is he supposed to contact somebody? So basically, you're not telling user to do anything. While you don't have the mockup, if you have the mockups, well and good for you. But a lot of front-end teams are not so fortunate and do not have as detailed mockups as some of us might have, right? So what can you learn from this is just that you show the same message that you're showing, but add an action item for the user. Like, whom should they contact? Where should they drop an email? So just thinking like a user, this is where you have added a little bit of action items so that if an application is failing, user exactly knows what to do or whom to contact. The next one is be open-minded. So remember that whenever you're trying to implement any features, it not only costs effort, but it's also costing money. If you take 3 months, it's not just that we are spending money on the 3 months of effort, but it's also that you're getting paid for 3 months, which is a lot of money, right? So some of the things that you might wanna, and I really love this image, right? Always try to think about that whenever you're trying to develop features, there are a lot of times you will figure out that maybe putting a button on the right-hand side instead of left-hand side is a huge effort. And again, it is not, but I'm just giving an example, right? It is a huge effort, but the value that you gain from it is really low. Like the user might not care whether the button is on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side. And this just being an example, always try to evaluate which of these features are actually very high in effort but very low in value versus which are these features which are low in effort and high in value, right? And once you have done a bit of an analysis on these, try to provide insights back to the UX on what are the technical possibilities of this, right? And for this particular, for this particular case where I'm telling you to be more open-minded, my favorite example is the charting libraries, right? So those of you who have not worked with high charts and D3, just to talk a little bit more about what they are the 2 charting libraries that pretty much help us achieve similar kind of charts with both. An example would be you can use both of these libraries and create line charts. High charts is has more inbuilt features, whereas D3 provides a lot of customization. So this is where I'm saying be open-minded, try to do a cost and value analysis, is because when you've been asked to create a chart, uh, this will help you decide which library you want to use. Do you really want to use D3, take 4 months to develop a line chart, whereas with a lot of complexity, with a lot of features added on top of it, which may or may not, which the users may or may not use, or should you go with high charts, which might take lesser effort, lesser code, and less maintenance, right? So these are some of the things that the UI needs to decide and give feedback to UX, because UX has no way to understand the technical difficulties in implementing any of these mockups, right? So try to be open-minded, be curious, and understand a little bit more about going back to, this is where it comes important, is ties back, is like, don't just copy the mockups, try to understand why this feature is really needed and how will the features be used. So just continuing on the same page is like, while doing the technical analysis and all of these phases, I'm telling that UI developer should work closely with UX. I just wanted to focus on what exactly would a collaboration look like, right? Most of the times, the way we are working in our industry is that we wait for the wireframes to come, then the business analyst creates our user stories, defines the acceptance criteria, we put the markups there, and then we start coding, right? So if you see that, and then UX goes and start creating wireframes for the new features, whereas developer is working on the features for which the markups have already been ready, right? So as you see, this seems like it's a waterfall approach rather than collaboration. So this is where I know this is going to be a little bit difficult for a lot of us, but try to find time to collaborate with UX a little bit more rather than focusing on implementing page after page. So what does the collaboration look like, right? If a feature A is being designed by UX, try to offer your help and be like, hey, can I look into the mockups a bit earlier? Try to have some design sessions, learn more about how they think, and then try to give some insights about what are the technical possibilities on some of these designs that might come in future, much early in the process, rather than doing a waterfall. So this could be very much similar to like Agile, right? Like a user and the developers keep interacting and they give a feedback is the same thing I want you to work with the developer, and the same way I want developer and UX to work together. And always remember that UX is not only the one with the great ideas. We have a misconception that just because they have done more user analysis, they focus more on design thinking, we are not sure how we can contribute, right? So just try to once you have done all the first few things, right? Try to understanding your users. Don't just look into the mockups as page after page. You might be able to start the open communication and collaborating more with UX. And with time, you will actually find this much rewarding, and you will feel that you are owning a piece of work rather than just copy pasting what's done on the mockups. And in today, we are actually, we're often confused about that. Okay, whether our work is rewarding or not, whether I should move to something new. Just interaction more with the UX and user kind of gives a sense of purpose to a UI developer, and I think it's really important. For me, just personally, while I'm already doing a couple of these, the last thing that is collaboration has really changed the thought, has really changed the way I think. While the initiative was done by UX, I am very fortunate that my UX started doing these mock-up reviews and say, hey, do you want to look into the mock-ups a bit early? And I can definitely tell you that it is much more rewarding to work in collaboration with UX rather than working in a waterfall approach. So how does all of those things that I talked about, right? The four main pointers, how does it tie it back, right? And collaborating with UX, and why is it more important, right? So as you can see on the left-hand side, there is no problem with any of these mockups, right? The UX has created a mockup to load an image, and you are basically saying, okay, as a task, all I need to do is fetch the image from the backend and show it on the image. So show it on the phone, right? Once you have fetched the image, this is how it looks like. But always remember that UX has no idea about how the real images look like. What is the size of the image? What are the colors of the images? So just an improvement when you think like a UX, what could you improve? And one of the ideas comes up, which every application has some odd images. Do I need to stretch the image? If I stretch the image, am I supposed to maintain the aspect ratio of it? These are some of the questions that you can answer, and you can try it out when you're trying to think like a user. So just showing a comparison where both of them does the same, in both the cases, we are seeing the image, but you are the only person who can basically enlarge the image once you have seen that the image is so tiny when returned from the backend, right? So just a couple more examples before. So again, we have icons all over the application, and often we don't think about the icons much because an example would be settings gear, right? While some of the icons are very obvious, like settings gear, an add button, delete buttons, right? Some of the icons might not be very clear. And most of the time mockups tell, okay, yeah, we need to show tooltips, but a lot of times even UX might forget to do that. And if you don't think like a UI, if you don't think like a user and don't think like a UX, who else will, right? If the mockups have been forgotten. An example would be one of these charts, right? We have these three icons are basically used in my application right now, but trust me, even being 8 years into UI UX, I do not understand what the first icon is supposed to do to the chart. Like if I click on it, how does it impact the chart? The second icon, I have no idea. And the third icon, sure, it feels like obvious. It might stretch or bring it to a full screen my chart. So what can you do better? It's a very simple solution, which we often miss, is like start adding tooltips to all the icons or any of the text which has been shortened. While some of these things might seem unnecessary and obvious, I can assure you that it adds a huge advantage to our users. Like just mentioned, is that I had not even in a million years guessed that the first icon is actually for the access settings. Like it enables and disables, it hides and shows the accesses of the chart. So just showing that even an experienced person might get confused with the icons. Again, error messages, most of us are already doing this, but we often have seen in a lot of applications that an error notification or an error message has been shown, but it does not tell me what is wrong, right? I'm typing and it starts throwing me an error saying email address is invalid, right? even before I have finished it. So I'm like, wait, what did I do wrong, right? A very simple things which often, sure, if you have the markups, if you have the perfect markups, that's well and good. But I can assure you there are times markups are being missed, and this is where you have to use your own brains. Can you add more value to the error messages so that in return the user can understand what exactly is going on? Now, if I take a vote, none of you will say, oh, I love this error message versus this, right? And you don't need to be a user to evaluate some of these things. And by no means I'm saying that UX has done a really bad job if they have given me this error message, but again, collaborate more with your UX designers. They might be learning, they might be first timers, and then give some feedback that, oh, how about the error messages, something like this, because it's more intuitive and this is something that I've learned to do in my past applications. So you're not just thinking like a UX, or not thinking just like assuming yourself to be user, but you're also continuously improving your application. I am not advertising Athleta. I just like to shop there, and that's why I took their image, right? But most of us who are here have shopped or will be shopping online or are shopping online, right? Most of the times. Often during the Amazon Prime Day sales and a lot of these things, I've seen that I add an item to the cart and the icon, like if you see, when you add an icon to the cart shows number 1, 2, 3. But a lot of times it will be that the item has not been added to cart, right? For me, I don't understand whether the website is not working, whether the product is out of stock, or what exactly it is. And this is where you can improve your customer experience to try to show a toaster message or a more dialogue, or just like a warning on the top of the thing, right? Unable to add to the item to the cart. I already know you're not able to add to the cart, but tell me why it is. Why didn't you add my item to the cart, right? So it's basically telling out of stock, or like the system is not responding, or something like this, to tell the user that what exactly went wrong with the when the user clicked to add to cart, right? With all those examples and there's tons of examples, right? I could not include all of those examples. So just gave you some of the most common mistakes that I have made. I have experienced my team members making it, so I just wanted to highlight that, right? But there are several more. Now that I just want to focus on this tiny little image, right? Try to not just focus on the coding. Try to train your brain to think more like a user, get in touch and collaborate more with the UX. And once you're trained, your brain it's literally just funny, right? Use it. If the error messages don't make sense to you, there's high chances it will not make sense to the users as well. And the truth is that nobody uses the application more than you as a UI developer in the initial stages of the implementation of the features, right? So who can be a better judge of a UI than you yourself? With this, I would just thank Women Who Code Front-End community for letting me talk about this topic today. Special thanks to Liz for the leadership team who reached out to me, helped me test the system. And thank you everyone for being here and listening to my presentation today. We'll be taking questions now.
That was wonderful, Sneha. And I totally love the approach. Yeah, I didn't realize that you are the highest frequency user when your application is in the early development process. And it makes sense to have a little bit more critical thinking and see how can we improve the product. Questions? Well, somebody was asking, let me see who was this. Nisha was asking about the event that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk.
Oh, yes. So the event that I was talking in the beginning of my presentation was the Grace Hopper. It's one of the largest events. It is held virtually. I don't know if it's still held virtually. It was just because of COVID. But it is, depends on which year. It is usually held in Houston or in Florida. And they alternate between those two. But I don't know if they do events throughout the world, or is it just very specific to North America? But I know it's the largest, one of the largest women in tech conferences in America. And I'm sure there's something similar in every country, but it's Grace Hopper. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of others. Other conferences in other countries. Shall we take the next question?
Let me see. Maria was mentioning, all right, know that I can't edit. Tell me why. Okay, that was cool. And well, we have a couple of questions here. Are there tools to help programmers think of user experience of web online?
So I'm not aware of the tools, but I know there is a ton of material and there is a ton of posting. So if you want to learn, if you want to think more like user experience, I would first suggest, if you have access to a UX person in-house, try to reach out to them and get resources from them, because the amount of resources that they have access to, or they will be the best person to tell you whether those resources are good versus bad and can filter out some of the content for you. If you do not have access to those, whenever the video is posted, I can paste some of these links. But one of my favorite ones is the 10 usability heuristics, where you can very quickly just learn about the 10 things. And then quickly, like, if you know these 10 things, you're basically covered more than 50% of the ways the user thinks or interacts with the system. So yeah, sure, I will paste this in the chat window, or I will ask Liz to share it on the video. But as far as tools, I am not aware of any tools. Those are my approaches that I usually take, or I have took in the past.
Thank you, Sneha. Next question will be, how did you come up with this connection to center the user in all designs, whether the computer programming or with analysis and visualizations?
How did you,
how did you come with this approach to center the user in all designs, regardless of the programming language or, the tools for programming I think that's
yeah, okay. So I think I understood the question. And if I misunderstood and misanswered, reach out to me in LinkedIn and I will definitely respond back, right? I did not come up with a connection to user. Let me just start with that, right? It did not matter to me whether I had in the start coded with just JavaScript. I have done React and then Angular, right? With a couple of things, I did not come up with the center, making the user center of all my designs, right? It's how the UX thinks. And this is what, at the end of the day, the application will be used with your users, right? So all I can say is that after I realized that I can think more about the users, my UI development work has become much more better. It has become much more rewarding rather than just like coding page after page. So it's more like, again, going back to how did I learn some of those things is I learned some of these things by interacting more with UX, right? One of the sessions, just want to give an example, right? I was trying to do something and it just was a bit complicated. And rather than just doing it and taking more time to do it, I went back to UX and said, hey, can you explain me why do we need this feature and why are we doing something so complicated? And this is when the UX explains that how will the user be using this and what value does it add to the user, right? So it's not that we have to come up with this connection. The user is always there. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question completely, but we can always chat more about this topic. I know it's anonymous and attendee, but yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can talk more about this.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sneha. Thank you so much for your answer. It's more like getting closer to the UX team to say, hey, why do we need it? And understand the user behavior. If you want to test the usability as a user, you start thinking like a user, right? Straightforward. But yeah, if you want, well, I know that there's an anonymous attendee, but you can get in touch with Sneha and continue discussion about your inquiries of maybe you're working on something related to it and want to understand. And the last question, Sneha, is do you think computer programmers should undergo some UI, UX training to become better programmers? And second question is, should schools be including a class on UI or UX as part of course curriculum?
So I'll answer the first one, right? Do you think computer programmers? I don't think all the computer programmers need to go through the course of UI and UX, but I do believe that all front-end developers should at least try to go through some of the training or learn more about the content or the design thinking approach, right? To become a better programmer. And it is irrespective of which technologies you're working on. I just highlighted some of the things that were very common mistakes. As a front-end developer, I would never add tooltip because it's not in my markup. I'm not going to spend another 5 minutes of mine, but if I add those tooltips and I add a little bit more detail and making things obvious, it does make me a better programmer. And these are the ways you can stand out, right? As compared to somebody who's just copy pasting the markups and creating, which is, let me tell you, just copy pasting the markups. I'm not saying it's the easiest task, but it's I think you don't have to use a lot of your design side of your brain, right? So this is what I'm saying. You don't have to use the left side of your brain. But remember, you had two sides in your brain, so it can be really rewarding. Now, should schools be including class on UI UX as a core course curriculum? I do not think that we need to include this as a core course curriculum. It would be great, but I would definitely have this as one of the electives. So I'm not sure. I've studied back in India and I've also studied in US. I do feel that in US, a lot of universities do offer this course as an elective. So if you are somebody who wants to become a front-end developer, I highly recommend taking it. Not all the universities offer it, but thanks to web, and we have so much content online on Pluralsight, on Coursera. Just take a course and see it for yourself. Did it make you a better developer or not, right? Maybe your experience is very different from mine, but I would tell you that my first 4 years of my career versus my last 4 years of careers, where I've incorporated all of these things that I shared today, the latter has been much more rewarding for me.
Totally. And I see the final question, Sneha. Maria, she's mentioning, I do not usually work closely with the UX designer. The product manager usually addresses my questions. A lot of time design is not developer friendly. Images are overlapping. How to handle situations like that?
So this is where I'm saying, try to think like UX, right? If you don't have, and I would love to work in a project where I'm not given a UX so I can test some of my thought process, right? But how do you handle situations like that? I'm assuming when you're asking this question, you don't have UX, so you don't have wireframes, right? And for a person, somebody who do not have access to any of those things, I think this is where this presentation really kicks in. And when your product managers, when your product owner is giving you the requirement that, okay, we need those images, try to think as a user, do you really need to, maybe it's a requirement to overlap those images, but in general, do you really need to overlap those images? And I can tell you for sure that just because your product owner has given you something that is overlapping the images, you don't have to do it. Add a 20 pixel margin between the left and the right hand. If your images are like this on two sides, add a margin of 20 pixel. I am talking about take those very small initiatives. And this is a really good example, right? Don't make your images. It is all up to you. It doesn't matter what the UX has the wireframe on it, what the product owner has it. At the end, the code is in your hands. The way the application will look is in your hands. So you are the best person to provide some feedback, some suggestions and recommendations. So how do you handle that? Learn a little bit more about UX. If you don't have access to UX, do a course, and then start stepping up and give some of the recommendations. And if your product owner is not listening, switch your job, or I don't know.
Yeah, the idea is to, in the end, think about the product and how this will be beneficial to any given company. So I think it's part of the mission of making services digital to engage your users to do your product and the user. If you don't see that, you need to take action over it. Thank you so much, Sneha, for this super interesting talk. I well, I don't believe, I am sure that everybody learned a lot from you today. And we hope to have you soon in another talk to extend this topic, which I think that many people was interested into getting it, taking a deep dive into develop critical thinking to learn how to improve the products that we typically do.